Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Allow me to welcome you to the 10th series of CPST webinar conference. This is the 10th webinar conference, Unpacking the Budget Policy Statement for the year 2024-2023. Allow me at this particular time to invite the Executive Director, CPST, Professor Nyukabi Kamau, who is the host for today's webinar seminar, to be able to make official remarks towards this 10th webinar series, and to welcome the rest of the participants, and of course, the keynote speaker, as well as the discussant and the moderator for the hour. Welcome, Professor Nyokabi Kamau.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Harrison Owino. Good morning, Dr. Rugo. Good morning, Deputy Clerk Sarah Kyoko, colleagues, all the people who have joined the webinar as of now. Good morning again. My name is Professor Nyukabi Kamau, as you've been told. I'm your host today. Welcome to the 10th webinar of the Center for Parliamentary Studies and Training. And my job would be very short this morning, is to introduce our very able Deputy Clerk, Mrs. Sarah Kyoko, who is Deputy Clerk of the National Assembly of Kenya, and she previously acted as a clerk of the National Assembly. So she makes history because she was the first woman clerk in the history of Kenya Parliament. Mrs. Kyoko has a long experience in parliamentary work. She says she has over 3 decades, but looking at that face, I don't know where the 3 decades have gone. Mrs. Kyoko holds a master's degree in business administration from ESAMI, and she has a bachelor's degree, a BA from the Egerton University. Besides her leadership roles in Parliament, Mrs. Kyoko serves as a member of various boards of secondary schools, is a member of Tandaza Board of Trustees, and is an ordained lay minister. That bit I didn't know, that this beautiful lady is an ordained lay minister. So I want to welcome you, Mrs. Kyoko, Deputy Clerk, National Assembly, to take over and moderate this.
Thank you very much, Professor. Myself and Professor have a history. I remember when she joined Parliament, I was the first person to receive her at the CPST. And I remember noticing the difference between how men run institutions and how women run institutions. Because whenever I did something well, she told me I had done well, something I wasn't used to, because men, you know you have done well when they give you the next assignment. They're not used to telling people well done. I think her telling me well done has propelled me very high and to many, many other places. So I'm eternally grateful, Professor, and I thank you even for this opportunity to moderate this activity. We will be discussing about majorly about the budget policy statement and issues budget, which budget has a lot to do with our economy, where we are and where we want to go as a country. We have speakers that will be speaking to us, and I do not want to speak on the subject, but I would like to welcome our speakers today, our panelists, to speak to us. And I will start with Dr. Abraham Rugo Murio. Dr. Murio is with us. You can see him. And I want to give just a brief introduction of Dr. Murio. he's a passionate and he's very passionate and committed to advancing local development. And currently is the country executive director of the International Budget Partnership in Kenya. He's based in Nairobi, and he's been in this office since July 2017. Before then, he worked at the Institute of Economic Affairs, that is from 2007 to 2013, and as a public policy and development consultant from 2014 to 2017. And so he has a wealth of experience working in decentralization, participatory government, and public finance management in Kenya. His work covers over 15 years, and that has enabled, which has entailed supporting citizens to participate in and advocate for improved service delivery by the government at the national and local level. This has been through his research, policy analysis, advocacy, facilitating capacity building programs, and engaging public education talks. Again, for Dr. Rugo, as a contemporary speaker, he has regularly engaged in training and public talks on topics around governance, public finance management, devolution, spiritual and holistic personal development. Dr. Rugo holds a master's degree and a doctoral degree in public management from the University of Potsdam in Germany. His early schooling was at Uhuru Primary School and Nakuru High School in Kenya. And during his undergraduate studies at Kenyatta University in Kenya also, he served as the vice president of the Kenyatta University Students Association for the period 2003 to 2004. And up to now, he remains an active voice in the public space in Kenya. And so, Dr. Rugo, Sana, you are welcome. Please, you may proceed.
Thank you so much, Madam Kioko. Thank you so much, Professor Nyokabi. It's been a while since we last met, and I appreciate. Please confirm that you can see my presentation. Good.
Yes, indeed.
Yes. Good. It's a joy for me to be invited by the Parliament of Kenya to be able to present on this conversation around the budget policy statement. And I'll dive straight in so that then we can have conducive engagement. The budget policy statement comes at a time of heightened activity within the political and economic space of the country, and therefore is of interest to many of us. In my presentation, I'm going to take an approach where basically I'll discuss why the BPS and how we engage at the International Budget Partnership and other civil society organizations. I'll speak about devolved framing, basically the place of devolution and what are some of the emerging issues around the BPS 2024. I'll then dig a bit into the main trends in the budget policy statement, and then I will go into a call for action within the time I have. The budget policy statement is a national document. It's a policy document, in other words, which means then it gives an overall picture. It's prepared by the National Treasury and approved by the Parliament of Kenya, and it provides for 5 things which are important as I'll be going through the presentation. One is that it provides for performance. How did we do in the previous year? This builds on, among others, the budget review and outlook paper. What did we do? Secondly, it sets the priorities for the coming year at a broad policy level in agriculture, in devolution, in infrastructure development and the like of the coming year. It is important for me to clarify that the coming year here is the year that starts in the July of 2024, and the previous year is the year that ended on June of 30th, 2023. And therefore, while it does refer to the current year of implementation, it's basically for the first half at the point where it is being provided. It also provides for projections for the revenue and expenditure, the division of revenue between national and county governments, and the ceilings for the national government ministries, departments, and agencies. Devolution is the DNA, and we want to start there because one of the critical things that we need to remind ourselves as people of this republic is that we run a devolved system of government, which is supposed to inform our policy, our politics, and administration of public services. In other words, Kenyans, through the Constitution, did provide for themselves a framing right from Chapter 1, and Chapter 4 is critical because it provides the specific bill rights of the citizens and what they expect. And then the responsibility of delivering on those functions is then distributed between a national government and 47 county governments through their respective ministries, departments, and agencies of the same. And therefore, each level is to be allocated funds based on their functions, finance following functions. And of course, the national government has an additional role of providing capacity building and revenue mobilization across the country. Now, this is important because the budget policy statement, as I have stated earlier, one of the critical things it does is how do functions get distributed? How do resources get distributed between the national government and the county governments? And moving forward, then we expect that the budget policy statement continues to be a critical space within which devolution of public services and how they are being implemented then gets actualized as it were. But how are we funding public services before I go even into devolution, into the budget policy 2024? There are 4 observations that we make as we read through this policy document and as we read through other documents that are related to it. One is that it's time for us to think about what is the development philosophy which informs our financing philosophy. What does this mean? The direction of a country in terms of development informs a lot in terms of where you put your money. So for instance, if you believe that the right thing to do is to have better fiscal infrastructure so that then you attract investors, then you put more money into fiscal infrastructure, as it were. If you believe it is in human capital, then you put more money into building and developing human capital, as it were. If it is in social security, again, where you basically make sure that you have a state that provides for the needs of the needy, the needs of the citizens, then you put in more resources. If it is in, in physical security, then you say it does not matter how many people are going to be straining and, perhaps struggling to make ends meet. What we are going to do is invest more in security so that then those who then cannot abide by the law then get arrested, and then you build more prisons and the like. These just are just examples. What is the way forward right now? And that's a big question that the BPS perhaps could delve a bit more. There is a focus, of course, with the bottom-up economic transformation agenda for economic recovery, but the goal is what is the current development philosophy, and as we will see, the financing philosophy later on does suggest that perhaps we are putting more resources into physical infrastructure. There's a bit of an emphasis on security, and we'll see that. The second observation is the question of public debt. Public debt is supposed to be an enabler, not just one that closes in on the deficit, but also that helps the government to provide on certain public services that it's not able to provide using the revenues that are available. But what if public debt becomes then an obstacle, because then the resources being spent to service public debt take too much away from necessary resources of public services? Again, we'll speak a bit about that. Pending bills. Again, we observe that pending bills are becoming an impediment to policy efforts at both national and county level. When you look at the national level, you are talking of the excesses of about 400 billion. When you look at the county level, you are looking at excesses of 160 billion. But in the national level, the government-owned enterprise of the semi-autonomous government agencies are a key driver, accounting for about 80% of the pending bills. And finally, the increasing dependence on public-private partnerships as a financing option. We see that in water with the 1.7 trillion earmarked for dams. You see that in agriculture, you see that in energy, and you see that in infrastructure. These are critical questions that are important. What are the overall highlights of the budget policy statement for 2024? We see a 4% rise in total government expenditure from 3.98 to 4.1, and this is largely attributed to the increase in that yellow section. The yellow section is the consolidated fund services, which basically this is where we have money that goes to payment of public debt, money that goes to payment of pensions and constitutional offices, as it were. Again, you notice that's how it is distributed. The executive, the budget is going down by 1 percentage point. Parliament, the budget remains at overall about 1%, at about 40 billion of the total budget. Judiciary at about 24 billion. Again, still minimal. Consolidated fund services, as I have explained, is growing by 2 percentage points. And then county governments is decreasing by 9 percentage point. And a large of it of the CFS basically is because of the debt service repayments. Again, here we look at revenue. How is revenue expected? Because what I've just showed is the expenditure. The revenue is expected to grow in 2024, 2025 by a 15% increase. These again comes after the previous increment, which was at about again over a 20% increment. As you can see, the total numbers there. The ordinary revenue is the revenue that we collect from our taxes, from VAT, from excise duty, from import duty, and income tax. The Ministry of Appropriations in Aid basically is the non-tax revenue, the payments we make for the different services at NTSA, immigration services, land transfers, and the like. You notice a substantial change there, but the significant one, and it's being driven by income from tax revenue, where we have the highest projected increase. Of importance is that already in this financial year, we are struggling with the income tax, and therefore, there are questions as to whether these projected raises are practical and what that would mean then to the taxation regime for the country. Again, looking just at how revenue sources are distributed, that's how you can see how they are distributed. Income tax still continues to occupy the highest share at 45%. Value-added tax, which by all means is a very regressive tax in the sense that it charges the same to everybody regardless of their levels of income or lack of it. Income tax is supposed to be by bands and by how much you earn. Then import duty and excise duty are a large factor of income tax because it is those who have incomes that basically drive importation and drive excise duty. And then, of course, the others that we say it is basically the non-tax revenues. The fiscal deficit, which continues to be a big concern, is that this is the difference between the expected expenditure and revenue. Already there is an anticipation that this will go down from an absolute figure of 761 to 753. If you include the grants basically these are donations that are made to the country, they are not loans, then that will be that you are reducing it from about 739 to about 703.9 billion. It's supposed to reduce again as a percentage of the GDP This is good news because our concern is that fiscal deficit continues to be one of the big drivers and challenges to the current financing framework, because as I will show later, the more the fiscal deficit continues to grow, the more it affects how much we borrow, and then that has a ripple effect in terms of how the focus is that domestically we will borrow more domestically at 53% and externally at 46%. Though this is at variance with the medium-term debt strategy, which suggests the reverse of the same, of 46 to local domestic borrowing and 54 to external financing. So that Parliament needs to clarify which is which. But basically, with a greater focus on domestic borrowing, it means then it continues. Whereas it's a good thing because we are borrowing in local currency. The exposure, as we might show later, is that exposure to higher interest rate, the latest one being at about 18.5%, as well as shorter repayment periods and the crowding out effect of other borrowers within the economy, that has got implication. For external financing, the big risk, of course, is forex fluctuation, but then the interest rates remain low, say for the latest Eurobond, which was at a double-digit percentage points. Public debt, as we've said, as we closed the year, we were at about 11.14 trillion. What does this mean? External debt, domestic to external debt, our domestic debt at 45.3%, and external debt at 54.7%. And the options moving forward, they are still, commercial borrowing is still on the table, but to be utilized as a point of last resort. But the interesting part is that it is to either finance fiscal deficit or repay maturing external debts. Now that's of concern, because if we are going to be taking debts to offset past debts, then there is a question about how we are investing the money that we have borrowed for development purposes. For net domestic financing requirements, again, met through issuance of treasury bonds in the domestic market. Again, a critical part is that this needs then to be along development projects, however we define development and for purposes of investments. Again, considering the BPS suggests considering other sources like climate financing options, debt nature, debt swaps, and other bonds that basically would serve that purpose. What do we see as the trends in budget allocations to social sectors? Again, to some of the sectors, we notice, for instance, education continues to occupy a fair total share at about 27%. I can see that broad orange bar. Agriculture, again, remember this is national government financing. So again, you would need to compute total agriculture by also looking at how much county governments are allocating, because it's a primary function. But again, still, as you can see, we are at 3%. Health, we are at 5% and 6%. Again, there is a balance of how much is going to county governments, how much is going to being spent by the national government, and of course, social protection remains at 3%. That is how the changes are happening. The proposed changes from 2023 to 2024. The highest increment being on national security, then followed by public administration and international relations. Then health at 6%. These are the changes in the budget ceilings, and then water and natural resources. And then as you go down, social protection has a negative allocation. Education, again, has a negative 3% compared to the previous year. The energy and infrastructure and ICT, the governance, justice and law, and then agriculture, rural and urban development, a minus 10%. And of course, and then gender economic affairs at negative 22%. So that's how the change has been proposed. As you remember, as I said, the budget policy statement provides for ceilings, and that's how the ceilings are looking like as we move into the new financial year. Again, here we do trend analysis just to show what has changed Again, related, you can notice that agriculture, rural development, development and urban development, again, not much has changed in terms of allocation. Education has remained substantially the same. National security has increased from 8% to 10%. Governance, basically all of them have remained at almost the same. Now, it's important that public administration and international relations is brought to book, because that's where also you have a lot of the funding towards devolution, as it were. The question is why, does that indicate of our development focus? Energy infrastructure and information ICT decreasing from 23% to 20%. National security raising from 8% to 10%. What does that tell us in terms of our development? But let me go back to the question of debt, because it is important for us to discuss it. When you look at our servicing of debt, in other words, the amount of money that we are spending year on year, this financial year of 2023-2024, we are going to spend every 73 shillings, out of every 100 shillings that we collect in ordinary revenue, 73 shillings will go towards debt repayment. That is expected to go down to 46. Because next financial year, basically, we have a decline in terms of how much we are going to be paying, but also notably that we still have an increase in terms of a CFS, largely driven, again, by debt repayment and by pensions. In terms of social protection, we have remained at the same level. In terms of health spending as a percentage of ordinary revenue, again, we have remained at the same level. And that tells you that then debt servicing is almost becoming the largest, line of spending in terms of our fiscal aspects. Again, when you look at how we are spending on debt financing compared to how much we are transferring to counties, you again see there the change has been, quite, when you look at in terms of trillion, in 2024, 2025, we are talking of 450 billion. Compared to 1.3 trillion in terms of debt repayment. This year is about 400 billion compared to about 1.87. In other words, we are spending almost 4.5 times on debt repayment than we are spending on transfer to county governments, which basically have a huge responsibility in terms of service delivery. What then does this mean in terms of our moving forward? One is that the BPS 2024 will need to spend a bit more conversation and time on the transfer of functions and complete implementation of devolution. We are concerned that unless we fully implement devolution, and what we are seeing with some of the laws that have been passed, with some of the activities happening in the health sector, happening in the agriculture sector, that we seem to be reversing some of the gains in devolution. The Council of Governors and the activities therein, again, there is a concern. And the reason why this is important is because unless we are clear of who is doing what and at what level, then we cannot allocate the sufficient resources to either level of government. How do you know whether the 450 billion is sufficient for provision of health services when you are not clear what functions are being transferred fully to that? And that is both at the national level and at the county level, so that then there's clarity. Even when it comes to auditing and for citizens to be able to hold their governments to account, they need to know who is doing what. Two, it is time to tame the fiscal deficit and manage borrowing. Again, this is critical because unless you address the fiscal deficit gaps, which have been increasing in year, last year alone, this current financial year alone, the fiscal deficit has gone up by 9%. We are not going to be able to manage our borrowing. We are basically going to try and continue mopping the room, but there's a leaking roof. And that needs to be dealt with. And that leads me to the next question of public accountability. Public accountability on resources and how they are spent, again, providing not just the fiscal targets or the financial targets of what we want to achieve, but also how much are we providing accountability and decentralizing that kind of a conversation to all parts of the country, so that then there is accountability at the national level, there is accountability at the county level, but there's also participation of the citizens. And finally, it is time to crack and firmly act on government-owned enterprises. Out of the 2.8 trillion risk exposure by the public sector in Kenya, 2.6 of that exposure is by the government-owned enterprises. And it is time for this to be actioned on, because they also tend to be also the ones that have got the highest pending bills, and two, also the ones that are borrowing, having the highest public guarantees on their borrowing. I'll stop there. I would have said much more, but given the time available, I'll stop there. Thank you very much, and happy for the conversations.
Thank you very much, Daktari. Before we go to plenary and take questions, I would like to invite our next speaker. Our next speaker was supposed to be the Honorable Ndindi Nyoro, who is the chair of the Budget and Appropriations Committee. Unfortunately, the chair is not with us today, and this is due to work-related exigencies. Because we are now at the point of considering the budget policy statement, and the chair Budget and Appropriations Committee is actually the centerpiece of the entire budgetary process. Now we are at injury time for BPS, so he's unable to be with us. However, we have an expert in his place from the Parliamentary Budget Office. This is Dr. Benjamin Gimor. Dr. Gimor is a senior fiscal analyst in the Parliamentary Budget Office. He's a very experienced policy analyst and a researcher in the field of public finance. Dr. Gimor holds a doctorate degree in economics from the University of Strathclyde. He is also a Commonwealth Scholar and a Mandela Washington Fellow. Before I call Dr. Gimor, please allow me to acknowledge in our presence Dr. Robert Kabucho, who is a country manager for Hans Skydel. I hope I pronounce it well. And I would also want to acknowledge the presence of Regina Mudeu, CEO SOCAT. You are welcome, and thank you for being with us. Now it is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Benjamin Gimor to give us the side of the Parliamentary Budget Office. We have heard from an expert from outside Parliament, so we want to hear from the expert in Parliament, after which we'll go to answer and question period. You're welcome, Dr. Gimor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Sarah Kiyoko, and I also want to thank the Center for Parliamentary Studies and Training, headed by Professor Nyokabi, for the opportunity. This is a very good platform to be able to sensitize the public on matters of budget policy. And, it really encourages and brings into the picture, the views and how they can be able to engage, and also give them information on matters that they can be able to pick out of this. And I want to thank my good friend, Abraham Rugo, for, taking the call and offering this, keynote address. So here, I'll touch on a few things of what, just to be able to clarify on some of the matters, because the whole point of this platform is to be able to provide more understanding on the budget policy. So I'll talk about that. But before that, let me talk about the role of Parliament, because currently in the calendar of the public finance of PFM, the budget policy statement is in Parliament. It was tabled in both houses on the 15th of February. And so it's currently being engaged by Parliament. And so that's the reason even why the Center for Parliamentary Studies and Training came into this, into the forefront to be able to offer this webinar. So after it was tabled, the whole of last week, first of all, from the 16th, we've been having a call for public participation, where it was put on the newspaper for individuals to be able to send their memorandums. And I do believe most of the participants here have been able to engage or have been able to see that. And so that's even the reason why they are on the platform at the moment. It's ending today at 5 p.m. So if you're sending any memorandums, please do it by 5 p.m. today, Monday. So, and then within, the period of last week, the departmental committees which oversight specific ministries were briefed by my office, the Parliamentary Budget Office, and also engaged with the respective cabinet secretaries from the ministries to be able to understand what Rugo had identified earlier of the broad policy, the development policy, the priorities that government is proposing to be able to underpin the budget for the next financial year. So that was done last week. And most of the committees have retreated to write their reports, which they are retreated over the weekend. It was a working weekend for Parliament to be able to write their reports. And they are submitting them as from today to the Budget and Appropriations Committee. So after that, the submissions to the Budget and Appropriations Committee, plus also the Budget and Appropriations Committee reviewing the public participation memorandums and also engaging a few key stakeholders will be done over the whole of this week up to Friday. And then next week on Tuesday, over the weekend, the Budget and Appropriations Committee will have to also write its report. And on Tuesday, they will be tabling the report in the floor of the House, hoping to be able to that is next week on Tuesday, on the 5th, and hoping to be able to have it ready, approved by the House by the 7th. So that's the calendar of approval of the budget policy statement in Parliament, both for the National Assembly and the Senate. So Mwananchi, the role that Mwananchi has to play is sending in of the more understanding the budget policy statement itself, and this is one platform that you can be able to get more information on it, and then sending them memorandum by the end of today, which now be able to give time for Budget Appropriations Committee to consider them. So now let's go to the highlights of what my good friend Dr. Rugo just mentioned, and I do pick up quite a number of things from it. In even the engagements we've had with the different committees. Number one is on the development policy. So I'll just highlight a few things that he's mentioned just to be able to put a bit more meat onto it and just strengthen the point, and maybe it may help out in our discussion. So number one is on the development policy. Quite clearly, the government is implementing the bottom-up economic transformation agenda at the moment, the better. And it is inclined to the Vision 2030. So it's more of they're implementing the whole Vision 2030, but stepped down to, for the next period of the next 5 years, we're going to implement the better, which in line we do expect will be integrated into the medium-term plan 4, for which it's a bit concerning that it has been delayed, but we are hoping to have it launched within the year. That should be able to guide budget preparations up to 2027. So the development policy will be very, very critical right now, because it's going to help us identify the projects and the priorities of government moving forward. Number two will be the policy priorities, and I think Rugo has done a great job. When you're looking at public finance, you look at three sets of policies. That's a revenue policy, the expenditure policy, and the deficit financing policy. So the budget policy statement has brought out all of that. And as you engage with the budget policy statement, a big thing you have to look at is how is, when you have your revenues and your expenditures, your deficit is just more of the residual aspect. So you get to know how much revenues you're going to collect, how much you're going to spend, and if there is a shortfall, that is what you're supposed to use the deficit, your deficit finance, your deficit, how you're going to, that is going to be the deficit, and how you're going to finance it is very, very critical. And I think Abraham has done justice to that effect. However, I may just want to raise, and I think it's a comment, I saw also somebody has posted a question to that effect. How do we tame, the deficit financing, because it's, I think Rugo also mentioned that the deficit aspect is what causes the growth of your public debt. So when you look at public debt, you can't look at it on a standalone basis, but you have to come back and notice that the public debt is growing because of your revenue and expenditure policies. If you have higher expenditures and lower revenues, you're definitely just increasing your debt. So how do we tame it? Number one is to look at, we now come back and look at the two other policies. You're looking at your revenues, you're looking at your expenditures. Your revenues currently are doing roughly, as a percentage of GDP, you're doing around 15%, 16%. When you're looking at your expenditures, you're doing around 23% of GDP. That means you're borrowing close to around 7 to 8% of your GDP. That's what you're borrowing annually. And that one is going to add into your debt. How do we work it out? A developing country like ours, a least developing country like ours, when you compare it internationally, we should be doing around 20%. And that's why government has been putting a case forward to try look at how to increase our revenue base to be able to add in more money. However, now the question we may want to raise is, are the policies that we are proposing for revenues, are the measures you're proposing to be able to increase revenues, are they effective? Are they generating what we're expecting? That's very, very critical. Should we look at, and revenues are going to grow based on two aspects. Either you're going to collect more, that is, you're increasing your level of collection, either horizontally through increasing the number of people who are collecting revenue, who are paying revenue, or vertically through increasing your rates. But also the revenue itself can be able to grow if the GDP, the overall GDP of the country is going to grow. And the GDP is going to grow. And one thing that's going to drive it will be how because government intervenes into the market to ensure that the GDP can grow better by its government expenditures. And I think that is what Rugo talked about. When you're looking at the expenditures, you're looking at how effective, how efficient are we spending our money in government to be able to unlock a higher growth of GDP. So the revenue aspect, you're looking at how we can be able to grow the revenues. The expenditure aspect, how can we be able to ensure we have effective and efficient expenditure? So as we look at areas where we are planning on spending, I think discussions should come on how do we improve our efficiency? How do we improve our effectiveness of each and every shilling we are putting to respective expenditures? So that's something good, something very important. You're looking at your revenues, you're looking at expenditures, and definitely your deficit financing, can be tamed if you can be able to handle the first two. Pending bills. I think he spoke also about pending bills, which is a very, very big menace. It has been a big problem. And I'll say it has been used as a deficit financing policy in the past. We have pretty much, been rolling over. Instead of borrowing money, you just don't pay the people, but you have done the expenditures, which has not been a very good policy. It's bringing us into much problems. And the government at the moment is trying to look at how to address that matter effectively. I think there are discussions in the budget policy statement on how we can be able to address that matter. And these are also issues that Mwananchi may want to look at and see whether we've put in enough measures and enough control measures to ensure that we don't pile up pending bills in the future, or also be able to effectively address it. I think there's a task force that has been set up by government, by the national, by the executive to try address the issue about pending bills. Public-private partnership. It's a very good emerging avenue to be able to fund our expenditures. However, we also have to understand that it has its own pitfalls, it has its own challenges, and we have to be very critical on that matter. And that's the reason why it takes time for us to be able to, effectively turn a project into PPP. You notice that we've been doing it for a period, and it's now an emerging issue, and I think it may be one of the most big highlights that we need to have discussions on right now, so that each and every individual or the public can be able to understand what PPP is all about and which are the projects that can effectively work with respect to PPP, and what will be the role of the public and the role of government and the role of the private entity in undertaking the public-private partnership model of financing projects. So that's something very, very critical that has been looked at. It's still an emerging area. I think the success that we have is the expressway, but then we still have to look at how can it work in other sectors. How can it be able to work in water? Because there's quite a lot of PPP that is being discussed with respect to water. When you look at the sectoral allocations, very interesting. When you look at expenditures, the expenditure side, you notice that we have a lot with respect to areas like education and national security, and he also Rugo talked about debt servicing. I'll also call that as a sector, because it's a big area that we spend on. But when you look at public, okay, let me just pick out one or two of them. The one for education, majority of it goes to TSCs, payment of salaries, and also to junior secondary school capitation for universities, capitation for primary schools and secondary schools. So much of that goes, and as a developing country, okay, we are right on the crossroads between a least developed country and a highly developed country. Most of the highly developed countries provide such social safety nets. Education being one of them. It provides government-sponsored education, and that is going to, because we are tending to that direction, that is going to still be a very critical component of expenditure. So education is going to be very, very huge. Another one is, the public administration and international relations. Bulk of the money goes to police services there, and prison services there. So bulk of it is also salaries, and that's the reason why you can see it is also quite big. National security, we've been having challenges within the region, and that grew. It started growing around 2011 when we started having the operation in Somalia, and that has been taking a significant chunk of the monies of the country. So that is still quite critical. And then when you look at energy and infrastructure, the reason why you tend to see it slightly going down is because we're also looking at ideas on how we can be able to fund it through other means like the PPP, because that is where PPP can work. When you're looking at energy, when you're looking at infrastructure, roads and all that, that is the best place where PPP can be able to come and work. And that's the reason why you kind of notice that government may be looking at, softening its allocations to the sector moving forward, as we look at alternative financing to fund the sector, because it's a really huge capital intensive sector. So two more things that I may just want to highlight as we end. As I end my presentation, so as to allow for more engagements from the audience, is privatization of government-owned enterprises. This has been a big issue and has been discussed for a very, very long time. And I think it's high time it's been a burden to government. We've been bailing out different sectors, the sugar industry, we've been paying loans for KQ. I think it's high time that government really moves on and privatize. And that has been a call by the president, and we can see the same thing in the budget policy statement, looking at how we can be able to address the matter of privatization of government-owned enterprises. Now, lastly is the transfer to counties, special transfer of functions to counties. There has been a big issue about duplication between the national and the county governments in different areas. So you look at agriculture, you look at water, you look at roads. It's something that I think I do agree with the call by Dr. Abraham Rugo to try address that matter, because it's going to be very, very pertinent for government itself. So I think those are some of the key highlights that I will just be able to pick up from what has been discussed, or just to be able to end. I think the single treasury account, implementation of that, and also the aspects of of electronic procurement have been, also things that are being seen in the budget policy statement, which look like they're going to be very, very beneficial also for the country because of the positives. And I do believe that different stakeholders here have looked at it and seen the importance and, read through different researches on the importance of those matters. So what are the lessons learned and what are some of the things I think we can be able to take forward? Two things I may just talk about. Number one, I want to thank the CPST for this webinar and hoping that such could be developed, similar ones could be done in the future. One, because we're looking at more sensitization of the public, because we need to have this public engagement since it's paramount in our constitution. But to be able to do that, we need to have more of these engagements. And secondly, it's a call to different players here, especially think tanks and research institutions, on the aspect of research. We need more research to this, to be able to have a better engagement with the public. We need to not only have one view of the budget policy statement, but we need to have multiple views, multiple angles to which you can be able to research. We want to see, there are people who are going to look at the glass as half full, others who are going to look at it as half empty. We want all those views coming onto the table so as to be able to enrich the debate. So I think those two things, more sensitization and more research with respect to different government policies will be very important. For the last one, for the research, I'm really begging research institutions and also universities, think tanks to be able to come and play a big role to that effect. Thank you so much. I think that is a quick wrap up from my side.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ngimor. Thank you very much also, Dr. Rugo. Very insightful thoughts from both of you. And I can see we have a number of questions. So I want to allow for question time. The first is a request. The first I have seen is a request, I think, to Dr. Rugo to share the slides. But there is also another request to both of you that the audio be shared. I think that CPST is able to share. Professor, I believe we can share the... Okay, all right. Now going to questions. We have a question from Mr. Laban Musundi. Musundi has a concern that allocations are not aligning with what he calls rhetoric, because according to him, a big chunk is going to consumption. A big chunk of the budget is going to consumption, I believe, salaries and administrative expenses, as opposed to the productive sector. So his concern is, so how do we align what we are saying with reality, especially giving consideration to what would turn around the economy? And number two, he asks, what strategy would you suggest on, I think, decreasing the fiscal deficit, apart from taxation or collections of money from people, so as not to kill the goose, what he calls the goose that lays the golden egg, the punda imechoka. How do we get out of taxation, closing the fiscal deficit using other means? Those are his two questions. Would you want to take those first, or I can read four? You can go for those first, then we go to the next.
Yeah, we could start with that. And I completely. So first of all, I think it's important for us to appreciate that the budget is a balancing document. It's a trade-off. It's about trade-offs. You cannot say that you're going to invest in healthcare only and not agriculture, for instance, or you're going to invest only in education and not on roads and the like. So there's a trade-off. But perhaps the answer lies in two spaces. One is that every time you have a new government, there is an emphasis on the projects that they wish to pursue, that they are keen to make sure they implement. But sometimes that is not followed with a process of prioritization and perhaps facing of what needs to be done and completion even of what had been started before. And I think my input for this would be that there is need actually to face according to priority. So for instance, take an example in education. In education, you have a dual crisis of you don't have physical space, but you also don't have sufficient teachers who are well distributed. So the distribution aspect is a bit much easier because then that's a factor of providing conducive environment for teachers to be able to work in those spaces. But in a space like healthcare, you have more duplication than luck. And also the incentives where most of the human resources would prefer to work in cities, do not want to go and work in certain counties or in certain far-flung areas. So there are answers here that have to do with how much you ensure redistribution, which then means then you don't have to just spend money employing new people, but also making sure that those who are currently there are well distributed. You're right in terms of consumption. The fact that public debt, for instance, which is without any productive aspects being visibly available, then it becomes almost a consumptive area. The question around wage bill, I know has been debated many times, but I hold a very different view that we need to ask ourselves, what is development? I know the interpretation of development is capital projects, but in places where you have schools, where you have hospitals, where you have farmers, what is development? Is it still building more schools? Is it building more hospitals? Or is it actually ensuring that you have teachers, you have equipment, you have essential supplies, drugs and other essential supplies to the like, and therefore are not seeing that a public wage bill is just a negative driver of development, but also needs to be seen as actually a critical driver of development. What needs to be discussed is the productivity within public sector, which is a big area of concern, that you still have a fairly well-equipped public service, but then the productivity question, especially because of private aspects of it. But yes, trade-offs need to be made. Facing perhaps is the way to go, so that then you don't try to do everything at the same time. In terms of revenue and balancing with how much you can tax, the fiscal consolidation conversation, which basically has to do with how much revenue. There are two ways in which you can look at it. One is either you raise revenue or you manage expenditures, because it's basically an action of both. At the current moment, there seems to be greater focus on raising more revenue. And Dr. Ngimor did talk about in terms of even building the economy and the GDP. But the GDP is largely a factor of the productive sector that we have, as much as it is a factor of the kind of infrastructure, investments that we have made. Perhaps right now, the best way forward would be on reining in expenditures, especially on those duplication between national government sagas that are in between there and county governments. It's pretty much, if I was just to take three sectors, water, agriculture, are just good examples of where you have so many roles that are just distributed all over the place between the three. So you have national government, you have county governments, then in between, you have a multiplier of semi-autonomous government agencies that are doing the same things, in the agriculture sector or in the water sector. Once you deal with that, you already start to address expenditure questions, which then means you don't have to necessarily, because I believe, and I think I've said this before, we don't necessarily have a revenue problem. When you look at the trends, and I didn't present that, it actually shows year on year, there's been a revenue growth. Even when we don't meet our targets, we still have a revenue growth. What we have as a challenge is that the expenditure is growing far much faster than revenues. That's my take. Thanks.
Dr. Ngimor, would you want to weigh in? Or?
No, I think he's made quite extensive discussions on our part, so we could just move on. Your mic is off. Your mic is off.
We have a question by Mr. Odongo, who is asking, why isn't agriculture allocated 10% of the budget as per the Maputo Protocol? And I want to, oh my God. I could take field another question, which is asked by Anonymous, which is, how does the BPS sit with the Vision 2030? And how do we guard against overlap? And there is a specific question to Dr. Gimor. What are the guarantees that the comments by both houses of parliament will be incorporated into the BPS when it is adopted? I hope you are getting the question. And the other question I want you to answer before we move on to the next set of questions is that you explain plainly how the Eurobond works and how the current government has handled it. Please take those ones. Yes. We can start with Dr. Rugo.
I was going to seek the opportunity to Dr. Ngimor. Please, Ngimor, go first.
All right. Okay. Dr. Ngimor, please proceed.
The good part of starting fast is because I'll drop the Eurobond back to Abraham Rugo. Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Let's start with Odongo talking about the 10% Maputo Protocol, for agricultural sector. I do agree, but then the question that you also have to look at is agriculture is a shared function between national and county governments. So we should be able to look at in totality how much is being allocated on both levels to be able to see whether it meets the sort of that Maputo declaration. Also, we may have some, apart from just agriculture itself, you notice that when you look at the Maputo declaration and what is presumed to be agriculture, you also notice that we have other sectors within government that may be doing agricultural related work, like the State Department for Irrigation, which is underwater. And so when you look at the agriculture and rural development sector, it does not take into consideration that. And then we also have some amount of cash that is with the regional development authorities, which is under, I think it's public. I can't remember the sector itself. I don't know whether it's JECA or something, but you'll notice that there is some bit of money in different other sectors. And so we have to look at it in wholesome for us to understand, to see whether it's, which I do believe is already met the 10% threshold. So still throw it back to different researchers. Let's be able to dig deep into this sector and try to, into some of the declarations and the allocations to be able to see whether it meets the 10%. I do believe we are very, very close to the 10% when we amalgamate all of that. The second question was the anonymous one, talking about how the current BPS is to the Vision 2030. Like I did indicate earlier on the development policy, and I think my colleague also, Rugo, mentioned it, the BPS aligns to the budget, the better priority, which now is aligned to the medium-term plan 4 of the Vision 2030, which now aligns to the whole Vision 2030. So technically, the Vision 2030 was what is our bigger blueprint, but then it's been divided because of our political cycle. It's been divided into medium-term plans. We had the first one between 2008 to 2013, second one from 2013 to 2017, third one from 2017 to 2022, and now we're implementing the fourth one. Like I said, it's already been prepared. That's the information we have from government, but it's just yet to be launched. But when you look at the BPS, it speaks a lot to the medium-term plan 4. So that means we have a thread that links the BPS to the Vision 2030. what guarantees are there that the comments by the National Assembly and the Senate will be captured by the National Treasury when the House adopts the report? That I'll say there is guarantees, because the PFM requires that if the National Treasury is going to deviate from what has been approved in the BPS by the two houses, when submitting the budget estimates, it will present a memo. It will also accompany to the memorandum indicating how they have adhered to the proposals by the two houses. So that is going to be part of the discussion. And so since it's going to be brought to the to Parliament, and Parliament is a budget making organ, when it comes to Parliament, Parliament can be able to look at it, see where, based on the memorandum, what has not been adhered to, and how Treasury have tried to amend it, and whether it is acceptable or not. Because there are times when midstream we have new revenues coming in, maybe new loans, new agreements, and so we may want to alter the budget to some extent. Some of the questions that we are going to raise right now, and some of the researches that may be done, may look at even, let's say, if something like the revenue policy, and you notice that maybe some of the proposals we're putting with respect to revenue are not adhering to, or are not feasible as they were they had been projected prior to the BPS being tabled. So some of those things have to be looked at. And just to be able to, in summary, there is an opportunity to have, there is a guarantee to which to ensure that the comments are taken into consideration. With the Eurobond, I think I'll throw it back to Rugo. You can be able to talk about that as much. All I can just say is it's a whole big ball game. Hopefully we can have a different other webinar to be able to discuss, aspects of the Eurobond itself. But I don't know whether Rugo will want to comment right now.
Dr. Rugo, please.
Yeah, quickly, I think I'll just say that one, the Eurobond is a commercial borrowing in the commercial in the international market. And the goal is that for such commercial borrowing, then you are able, first of all, to enter into agreements of, to follow this. It's basically the same way we will do a treasury bond in our domestic market. This one, you basically issue it and offer certain returns in the commercial, I mean in the external market, in the international market. And this came as a result of largely countries that could not afford more concessional borrowing. Concessional borrowing meaning that lots borrowing that at a very low percentage rates, that is basically for much poorer countries, and therefore Kenya already becoming a lower middle income countries, then could be able to borrow this commercial. But the goal was that even with the commercial borrowing, you have access to resources that you would otherwise not have access to. You invest them in certain projects that give you a fairly good return. And if you remember, for instance, a lot of them have been at around 7%, 8%. The latest one that we have used to repay basically was the highest at almost 11%. And therefore, this is just commercial borrowing, and it's supposed to be for high return because it's high risk. It's also supposed to be for high return kind of investments, very targeted kind of investments, so that then which give you return, so that then when you come to repaying, basically then you're in a good place, as it were. To be able to engage, but as Nimor says, you will need a bit more. Somebody else has asked a question: how comes that 24-25 the debt repayments are actually a lower percentage, yet in absolute numbers they are higher? Two things you need to notice: that one, we do not have any redemptions that we are making. Remember, this year we had a redemption to make of almost 300 billion if you exchange the dollar at 150, which is what now has been repaid. Big portion of it through the Eurobond, but next year there is no big redemption. In other words, there's no huge principal repayment. But remember, this is a percentage of ordinary revenue target. Our revenue target is moving from 2.5 to 2.9 trillion Kenya shillings, and therefore, when that's why sometimes percentages can mask certain things. You already have almost a 400 billion increase in terms of revenue, and therefore that's why the percentage is coming down. That's the main reason. Doesn't mean we are going to be paying any less, but just basically means that the growth of the projected revenue is far much higher than the growth of the repayment that we are going to be making. That's what brings it to 46%. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We should actually be already have wound up, but we have a number of questions. Professor, we can take the remaining questions. It's already midday. Harry, we take the remaining questions?
Yes, let's do the remaining questions.
Yeah, okay, all right. So I'll read all the remaining questions, and then you can, the two Daktaris, who could answer them. And the first one is on privatization. And the question is whether we could shift strategy by creating an enabling environment so that there are more options. We have more players as opposed to sticking to privatization. That is a question by Laban Musundi. We have a question by Dennis Abisai, who is asking Dr. Rugo to clarify how the percentage of revenue to debt repayment will drastically drop this year from 73% to 43% in the next financial year. There is a Mr. Nyapere who is asking why we wouldn't simplify the BPS so that it's written in a language that is more understandable by the public, and whether we can leverage on our public communication as experts to do this. I think that one, Dr. Gimori will answer. Miss Lucy Kimathi is asking Dr. Rugo to highlight on long-term sustainability on the increased interest rates payable by the government from domestic borrowing, given that domestic borrowing has increased tremendously. There is Anonymous who is asking what are the internal and external borrowing proportions and what the effects are of either on the economy. And the last question is from Ms. Esther Ngamau, who is asking that what is the nexus between the BPS and the county fiscal strategy? I think the last question by Zomo has been answered already because it's touching on the Eurobond, which Dr. Rugo has spoken to. Please answer those as we wind up. You can begin either way. I can see you already. So one of you, maybe Dr. Ngimor.
Okay, thank you. I'll think I'll answer the question by the privatization one by Musundi, the one for communication by Nyapere, Esther's communication question on the nexus between BPS and CFSP, and then I pick those ones. Maybe the anonymous one, the one about the majority having their way, and then I'll throw the others because I think they are clearly marked to my colleague Dr. Rugo. So the first one on privatization, this is a very good Musundi. This is a very good idea, and I hope you can be able to have it documented because it's a different view. It's a discussion, like I said, it's a discussion that has been brought onto the table now. It's been mooted for a very, very long time. You remember we have, I think, the first proposal on privatization by Abdikadir, something, a report they did around 2013, 2014. But it's been a discussion that has is still gaining some bit of a foothold. And so the different views that you're bringing onto the table are very interesting, trying to see how we can be able to expand the field, not only privatize. I do believe it's a discussion we can have, and I do agree with you that you bring. Let's have that discussion and see whether we can criticize the strategy. So that one, I'm really open. It's a good option. It's a good opinion, and I hope we can be able to have it documented and sent to BAC. The discussion, Leonard Nyapere, about mechanisms budget office is using to engage the communication experts in unwinding the BPS. Good idea. We've been doing our analysis, but I do understand what you're bringing into the table. The fact that maybe communication, we can improve on our communication strategy. We do have an unpacking of the budget policy statement, which I have to confirm. I think it has already been uploaded. on the website of Parliament. If not, it should be uploaded within this week. And it has tried to simplify the discussion or the understanding of the BPS. And also platforms like this, like I said, I think this is a call to IBP, a call to CPST, a call to all other stakeholders who take part in citizen sensitization to also increase the number of platforms like this, like the webinars and maybe town hall discussions, to be able to, for people to be able to get more information. So I do agree that we need more and more communication, possibly get communication experts who have better ideas than us economists who just look and crank the numbers to be able to tell us how best we can be able to send the message to the public. Esther, the nexus between, that is Esther and Gamau, the nexus between...
Dr. Dimore, please just be very brief because we are already past time.
Okay.
You can also answer, as you answer, the question on whether the public participation discussions mean anything, since when it comes to the floor, the majority will have their way and the minority will have their say. Please, in 2 minutes, you can wrap up.
Okay, good. The nexus between the BPS is at the national level, the replica at the county level is the CFSP. As you notice in the BPS, we have something the division of revenue, which is going to identify what percentage of the national cake is going to be taken to the counties. And so the counties, and the reason why the CFSP comes on the 20th of February, while the BPS comes on the 14th of February, is to be able to allow for that gap. As you're developing the CFSP, you get to know what is being discussed in the BPS so that they can be able to input it in the CFSP. So there is a clear connection between the two with respect to now the allocation, because 90% of the allocations to the counties come from the kitty at the national level. So the last one is the aspect about these discussions. They do have a big effect because there will be, one thing that people don't understand is that it just brings in discussion. Even that small comment, like the comment by Musundi on privatization, has, it may bring in discussions on trying to look at whether we are doing it in the correct way. That's the whole idea why the Constitution brought in public participation. So don't feel like your voice won't be heard. I do believe and agree that there will be an impact if you can be able to package your document well and your proposals well to be able to be sent to Parliament. Thank you.
Good.
Dr. Ugo, you could, as you answer, and please take 3 minutes at most, comment also on the extent to which the current BPS prioritizes a shift towards sustainable funding of the budget and reduction of the overall deficit management. That's a question by Peter Mushira. Please answer that in all the questions in 3 minutes. Please
Thank you.
go.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I will attempt. And the beauty is that this is not the end of the conversation. As I said, we have been part of this process and more than happy to continue these discussions. Just last week, actually, we put together a deliberation on the same that brought about 452 people from 43 counties, which is really, really phenomenal. The internal and external borrowing, as I said earlier, it's really a trade-offs question. The biggest challenge and the biggest issue we have with the internal borrowing, or what we call domestic borrowing, is the fact that it's two factors. One is that the interest rates are moving to a level that is unmanageable. At 18%, it's very difficult to put anything in investment that will give you an 18% plus return for you to be able to pay. Secondly, the terms of payment, as you have seen, are getting lesser and lesser. Now, people are subscribing, want to give government money at a very short time, and come. But the last one and most critical is the fact that the long-term sustainability of debt repayment is a factor of incomes. And a factor of incomes means investment by private actors. And those are the ones being crowded out by government. When government comes borrowing at 18%, when you go to the bank right now, you'll not get a loan at less than 21% or 22%. Now, for you to be able to repay your loan at 22% and be able to pay your workers and be able to pay your taxes and be able to make a profit as a business is difficult. And therefore, what that means is that the replica effect, the long-term effect, is that you can quickly crowd out private investors, you can quickly push out incomes, and therefore that means then you have less and less income tax. Which means then it becomes a vicious cycle, as it were. That's the most challenge. External, of course, the biggest challenge is forex fluctuations, and we can discuss a bit more on that. The BPS, as I said, is proposing going down on fiscal deficit as an absolute number to 703 if you include the grants expected. That is already moving from 785, which is going to be a significant 785 this year. If we continue in that direction, then therefore we start then reducing. But our approximation, and I think the budget policy statement of 2022 had suggested that we needed to go to a figure below 400 billion. In fact, I remember, I think we were working with a figure of about 400 billion. The report that Back had tabled in the House. Whatever happened to it, I have no idea. But basically that then means that you need to halve the current fiscal deficit. Because if you don't rein in deficit, you keep borrowing. And as I said, you keep mopping a house. My last word is that as Kenyans, we need to continue putting in our views and our perspectives on this matter. This is our country, bottom line. And our members of parliament will continue to push that they actually do the right thing, action on the right purposes. I don't think we should shy away from sending in our views and our perspectives, our thoughts, even if they are not numbers, even if all you can send is questions. I wish all the questions asked in this panel could be sent as a memorandum because you don't have to have answers. You can ask them. That's why it's a House of Representatives, and that's why Gimor and the whole team is there to help answer some of these questions. So even if you're going to just ask questions, 10 questions I have for Parliament that bother me, it becomes very, very important. But most importantly, I want to really appreciate CPST and the leadership of Parliament for finding time to have this conversation. It's been a joy, and I appreciate my team at IBP Kenya for helping me put all this together. As I said, it's not been an individual effort, and we continue to engage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, both Dactaris. We are very grateful for your contribution. I see we have run short of time. We still have more questions. We can carry on this discussion. Somebody is asking how the government uses the Eurobond, of course, to fund services and the other works that it is doing. Somebody is asking whether the BPS can be translated to Kiswahili. This is an option we can explore, I believe, with the PBO, Dr. Gimor. So let's see what we can do together with the National Treasury about this question. We have really come to the end of our time, but before I end, I would like to acknowledge the presence of the following people. Mr. G.K. Murangari, the CEO, Institute of Public Finance, Kenya. I would also want to acknowledge the presence of Alphonse Shiundu, Head of Africa, Czech, Kenya. I would like to acknowledge the presence of the Honorable Nabuin Ekwo, our MP, Turkana North constituency, and also the presence of Ms. Joy Ndivo, who is the chair of Kenya Power and Lighting Company. Thank you for coming. This discussion will certainly not end today. We'll carry it going forward. And now I want to invite the professor and thank her very much for organizing this webinar so that she may close for us. Thank you. Welcome, Professor.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Mrs. Kioko. Thank you, Dr. Rugo, Dr. Gimor. I think I learned a lot. We really get time to unpack the BPS the way you've done it. Thank you, Gimor, for giving us your rejoinder. It was really good. We want to bring this to a close. It's already 12:18. We like to make it just 1 hour, but the questions kept coming. Thank you all. We still have about 170 participants in the room. Thank you all for staying in. Harrison Owino and your team, you could do the quick evaluation, but really our guests, ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end. Owino, if you want to announce anything, please do, so we can evaluate and get a feedback on what the people would like us to do next and how they found the webinar. Asanteni sana. God bless you, Owino.
Over to Waiwa for announcement.
Okay. First, we want to thank PSC and CPST for giving us this platform. And we also thank the speakers, that's Dr. Abraham, Dr. Ngimor, and Mrs. Sarah Kioko, for taking time to participate in the topic. It's been very interesting, and we've been able to maintain high participation until the very end. We also thank the Webinar Planning Committee, hosted by Professor Nyokabi and Mr. Wino, who have worked tirelessly to ensure that this day has taken off. We want to inform participants that the next webinar is coming up. We'll let you know of the dates. The topic will be transfer of functions between national and county governments. So that should also be very interesting, and we shall let you know once more when we are ready. Lastly, we'd like to mention that the recording is available together with the presentation, and we'll share this through email, through the emails that you registered with. Otherwise, thank you so much for taking time to participate in this webinar, and have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you too. Have a good day.
Thank you all.
You too.
It's great having you.